Hello and welcome to my book YouTube channel focusing on fantasy and sci-fi novels. Some of you may know me. My name is Travis Gafford. From my interviews that I do in the gaming or esports scene, I do shows and content over there. I have actually been reading fantasy novels for the better part of the decade, and in making this video, I actually went and looked at all the ones that I've read in the past decade, and it's exactly 100. So perfect timing. I actually thought it was crazy that it came out to exactly 100, but it does. So I decided to make this channel as a fun side project because many people in esports and gaming either read fantasy sci-fi or they're interested in learning more about it. Whenever I've talked about it in interviews casually or on my shows, people ask questions about it. So I thought this would be a fun place for me to do some extra content. This channel itself will actually probably be mostly me talking about books that I've read. We're discussing them. We'll sort of see where it goes, but I also plan on doing interviews and conversations with other people in esports and gaming about books that we've both read or that they want to pitch me on. I think it's kind of a cool place for off-topic discussions that don't necessarily relate directly to fantasy and gaming, but you can learn about other people who like books, what they like, etc. Anyway, if you are super into hardcore sci-fi fantasy booktube, I'm probably not the person that you want to watch. I'm not going to be reading every single big fantasy book when it comes out. I tend to read about 10 or 12 books a year, which is not necessarily how many people that are running really big book YouTubes are. I would recommend Elliot Brooks, who's somebody that I started watching in the past couple months. If you really want more of that stuff, she goes into that a ton. I'll link her YouTube channel in the description for that. But this is, again, just for kind of the fun stuff. I kind of hope that the people that watch this channel, it's a great place for the Venn diagram of people who are gamers and like gaming and esports kind of crosses over with fantasy. There you go. So many people have asked me what my recommendations are. They might want to get into modern fantasy for the first time, and that's what this video is really going to be about. I'm going to give you some recommendations, some paths on how to get in. By the way, when I say modern fantasy, I know it can also mean like stuff that takes place in the current day. I mean stuff that's been written the past 10 or 20 years, because I think a pretty big misconception about fantasy is people tend to think it's like Lord of the Rings, right? Everybody knows Lord of the Rings. You've seen the movies. If you haven't read the books, people think that's what fantasy is, and it kind of makes sense, right? Because that was the series that really invented the genre. That's, I think, where most people draw their inspiration from, or they draw from somebody else who's been inspired by it, right? So I totally get that. But the modern fantasy stuff, it's not very much at all like Lord of the Rings in a lot of ways. So for instance, the dialogue is written, generally speaking, in a pretty contemporary fashion. People speak the same way. A lot of times they'll drop like an F-bomb or whatever, depending on the author. So it's a lot easier to kind of read the stuff rather than maybe some of the special fancy ways that Lord of the Rings is written. One of the things that I really love, my favorite thing actually about fantasy, great characters, great plot, but I really love magic systems. As a gamer, I really connect with the magic systems that are in modern day books, where you kind of have people who you fundamentally understand the way the magic system works, right? There's a resource that people usually have to tap into, kind of like in video games, and you kind of understand the rules and boundaries. I would contrast this, for instance, to Harry Potter, where nothing against Harry Potter. I'm sure there are a lot of Harry Potter fans. I like Harry Potter. But the magic system in that is kind of like you point your wand and you say a word, and kind of the way that you say the word and your will maybe, and also kind of your wand compared to theirs affects the way that your magic works against somebody else's. Nowadays, modern fantasy has got a little bit more constraints and a little bit of a more clear system in the way that the magic works. So if you like games, I think that's probably a really good reason why you might like fantasy, and especially the books that are written nowadays with great fantasy or magic systems. Also, by the way, a lot of people think that modern fantasy is Game of Thrones. Again, very understandable, because it's like a more recent fantasy thing that has come out. But not everything is so grim and dark and kind of hard to read. I actually tried to read Game of Thrones and couldn't get super far into it. There's a lot of stuff I think that is a little bit easier and more approachable. That's what this video is going to be about. So without further ado, here's 2.5 paths to get into fantasy if you want to check it out. So the first book I would recommend is Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. This is a book that I would recommend if maybe you don't read a lot, or you are getting into fantasy for the first time, or you're not really ready for something that is like a really complex, crazy world, you want something that's a little bit easier to dip your toes into. I wouldn't say it's a short read, but it's about average length. So it's not like you're going to be picking up this giant tome like some fantasy books are. It's pretty easy to read. If you want a bit of a pitch on it, it takes place in a pseudo post-apocalyptic world. The main sort of plot is about a heist that is going to take place against this tyrant that basically rules over the world, and it's kind of fun in that way. The main magic system, again, I love magic systems, involves using, this is a simple version of it, but it mostly involves using metal to change physics or aspects of the world. So certain characters can consume certain metals in order to, for instance, pull metal towards them or push themselves, kind of like a magnet. Others can consume different metals to make themselves stronger or to affect emotions of other people. You gotta get an idea of like what metals can do what characters can do what, and it's pretty good. By the way, this is a first book in a trilogy, but much like the first movie in Star Wars, like you don't need to watch the trilogy to enjoy it. It's got a clear beginning, clear ending, so don't worry, you're not committing to some super long trilogy by reading this. If that's another reason why, like, you can get into it and feel satisfied just reading the book, and maybe you decide you don't want to read anything else, or you don't want to read something else in the series. But I wouldn't recommend this, by the way, if you want something that's like really gritty. It does have some mature themes in it, but I would say it is almost kind of like borderline young adult. Again, there's some dark stuff in it, but if you're expecting, again, like Game of Thrones, you're not going to get that. There's not like crazy sex scenes or something, if that's what you're looking for. As an aside, by the way, this book is narrated by Michael Kramer, who is fantastic. He's probably my favorite narrator if you are into audiobooks, which leads me into the ad section of this video. It's not an official sponsor for the channel, but I have partnered with Audible through their affiliate program. I actually, as I mentioned, I've consumed 100 books in the past decade, and the way that I found that out was by going to my Audible library and looking at all the books that I have read in the past, or listened to, I should say, in the past decade. If you don't know about Audible, it is a subscription service where you basically pay a 1-month fee and you get a credit every month for a book of your choosing. The great thing about this, by the way, is that fantasy books can be quite long, so you get a lot of bang for your buck on Audible, whatever you want to do fantasy. And actually, you can right now, there's a link in the description below. You can go sign up and get your first book free, completely free. You can decide to cancel the membership. Signing up actually does help out the channel. By the way, that link, it's audibletrial.com/Travis Gafford, my name. If you need it, you can see it in the description of the channel. Do me a favor and copy paste that link if you've got ad block, though, because I noticed that ad block will just instantly kill it if you click the link. So again, audibletrial.com/Travis Gafford. They've got a ton of stuff, by the way, as part of your subscription, including Audible originals, a ton of books. I mean, you can look at their library, but again, I recommend any of the books that I'm going to say here. Mistborn, great example of one that you can go check out over there. By the way, I've also included affiliate links for Amazon for all the books that I'm talking about in this video, so that if you want to just get a paperback or something, you can do that as well. But highly recommend an Audible, really like them, have been a member of them for a very long time, so it was super easy for me to sign up and suggest them. Book number 2, path number 2 into fantasy, another Brandon Sanderson novel called Way of Kings. So this is the first book in a series called the Stormlight Archives, and this book is kind of like, if you don't want to start on the easy mode or like the entry-level mode for fantasy, you can read Way of Kings, because this is a crazy complicated world with a crazy magic system, and you basically just get thrown into it. It's like sink or swim. To give you a bit of, I guess, a teaser on it, imagine crazy fantasy armor suits with insane lightsaber blades, people fighting each other with this stuff. There's the whole world is built around the idea that there's this magic hurricane, essentially, that sweeps over the land once every 10 days and makes the environment super unique, because if you imagine, like, hurricane hitting everything, you probably don't have very many plants. The animal life is all kind of bizarre, so it is very alien and very different. By the way, you're going to be getting into something huge with this. It is part of a 10-book series. The first 3 are out. The 4th is coming out this November 2020, and the first book is definitely not standalone. So unlike Mistborn, you know, like, you're not going to get, I mean, it ends well. There's not cliffhanger, but it's still like, there's a lot more to come, and that's why this is like a bigger commitment that I wouldn't necessarily recommend for everybody who wants something light and easy to try out for their first time. I think you shouldn't read it, as I said, if this is something that's intimidating to you. But this, by the way, is also narrated by Michael Kramer, and so that's another great narrator if you decide to do the audiobook version of this. Then the final path that I have offered you, which is path 2.5, I guess, there's a pretty big asterisk on this, is Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. So this is the first book in the Kingkiller Chronicles, which is a trilogy. This is the book that really got me into fantasy. I tried this as one of the first books that I did on Audible, and man, was I like, I was like, I gotta find more books that are like this, and thankfully there are a lot like them, because this book is quite good. It's pretty easy to read. In fact, the writing style is really great. People say that they really like, you know, the way in which the prose is done. I can't even describe it. I'm not much enough of an English major to explain that for you. I'm a comms major, but I highly recommend it. It's got a great magic system. It's kind of a coming of age story. It's got a fantasy school. Takes place kind of in medieval times, right? It's more swords than it is guns. The writing is, as I said, super fun to read. Main character's really cool. Some people kind of accuse him of being a Mary Sue. Here's why you should not read it, and why I have like a giant asterisk. And I know all the fantasy fans out there right now are like, he's saying it. The author did not finish book 3, and it's been about 10 years. And you know, you probably hear a lot of people talk about like George R.R. Martin and not finishing Game of Thrones. Similar situation here. The author has said that he's experiencing some personal stuff that stopped him from working on it. I will note that it hasn't stopped him from going to a bunch of conventions and doing a bunch of D&D shows. I kind of get the feeling that he's more interested in being kind of a nerd culture icon than it is finishing book 3. So I don't know. If you are okay with the idea of reading something fantastic and not ever getting the ending, because who knows if he's ever going to, read this. That's not a great pitch. I can't really recommend it in good faith, but it is the book that got me into fantasy, and under normal circumstances would 100% be, even before those Brandon Sanderson novels, my recommendation for it. So something to think about. You can look more into it if you want to. Narrated by Nick Podell, who I also think is a great narrator. Also one of the reasons why I really like this series. Anyway, that's it for the introduction video to this fantasy channel. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you are somebody who likes fantasy and wants, you know, like, oh, Travis, I already know about all this stuff, I have a video that I've already recorded with Mark Zimmerman talking about the very first Stormlight Archive book, Way of Kings, which I referenced here. So if you've read that book, you'll be excited to watch our review and recap of it. And maybe if you're first getting into this, you decide to read that, and then, you know, and we'll do other stuff too. We'll do something on Mistborn. We'll talk about Kingkiller Chronicles. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Again, check out the links in the description below, and hopefully you subscribe if you like this channel, because it's a brand new channel and I got nothing going.